So, good evening, hello, and welcome everyone to the 38th episode of the Undermind. And my guest today, as last time, it's Antiga. Hi, Antiga, how are you doing?
Good morning.
And Freakling, and of course, we will continue last cast's topic and everything. Hi, Freakling, how are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Nice to back.
Nice to have you back. So, first of all, let's have some news, events, discussions, etc. Then we can get back to the, I'm sure, a very long topic of map design and everything about maps, because, yeah, we kind of just scratched the surface last time. So, quick update about Schnell, StarCraft Human and AI League. Most of you probably saw the announcement that it is in closed beta now. That means that a select few people can get access to it. The registration works on the website now. I just worked on it a little bit today. If you're a bot author, you are automatically eligible to participate in the closed beta, and I would like you to register. Um, that's enough. You can find any info on my site, so and let's not delve into it much more. I'm working on the website at the moment. Expect updates soon. Yeah, and of course, feature creep is real. Recently, I realized I need to implement some security measures, so to speak. Okay, and usual starting points, what you've been up to first, and well, Antigua, I think you have a lot to talk about. Let's start with AIST. How is it? How is it going? Is there anything new? Is there anything we should know?
Sure. So AIST registration is complete. We've got 8 bots playing. Some returning contenders this year from previous years, and some bots that have been updated that were a little bit older. Just pulling up the list here now while I'm thinking about it. So we've got Lukudis, McRave playing Zerg, Microwave playing Zerg, of course, LitaBot playing Terran. So Lita's confident at this point that he has a 4.4 update that should work well. Banana Brain playing Protoss, Purple Wave playing Protoss, of course. Dragons entered as Terran, and Willie T is in his Terran. So we've got 8 registrants for this year. Bots are due on the 28th, along with source and combined binaries, and then shortly thereafter I'll start running the tournament, and when I get it done is when I'll get it done at
Of
that
course.
point. And we'll see where it goes. Excited to see how the tournament plays out. We've got some strong competitors and really some leaders in the human versus AI sort of area. Some of which are doing really well on Schnell and getting updated for that closed beta as well in parallel to AIST.
That's awesome to hear. And recently, you had a little bit of a meetup in New York City, if I'm not very much mistaken. Can you tell a few words about that and who was there and how was it?
Sure. So I was in New York City for AAAI, which is a AI conference. Hal Pan was presenting a paper there um, that I had an acknowledgement on. In relation to build order selection and optimized customized algorithm for that
Is that paper
in relation to
public?
StarCraft. It is. It's linked in the Discord under the educational section. And if you want to exploit the openers of your opponents, it is a really quite important read. It's sort of state of the art of build order selection for openers at the current time.
I will link it in the podcast description. So, how was the meetup?
Great. I was only there for the one day and the night before, but we went out to what's it called? It starts with an S. Delicatessen, the really nice pastrami place in New York City. I got to remember what it is, but at any rate, went out there, had dinner, which was really nice. Got to spend hours and hours talking about bots. It was myself, Dan Gant, Brian Weber from Cunnybot, and Hal Pan, the four of us together. So we got to talk a lot about bot development and what's going on in the community and all that sort of stuff, and sort of brainstorm ideas on future bot development and stuff like that, which is really very enjoyable. So had a good time. Then went to the conference the next day, which is all about games and AI and things like that. After I had left, the other guys ran into some of the guys from the CITA team from South Korea. It does sound like that it's unlikely there'll probably be more updates from the CITA crew, but so that's a little unfortunate. But really, just a great opportunity to meet everyone, enjoy time together, and have a good time.
I'm glad to hear that. Anything about that brainstorming you would like to share?
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's just fun to get together and talk, but it's really interesting. But there's some fun talking about what future strategies and things like that people will do, and things like that. So, the name of the place was Cat's Delicatessen. It was great pastrami.
Good. And I'm sure Nightcat would have preferred that place. So
it was wonderful.
yeah, that's an unpaid advertisement, by the way. We are not endorsed, sadly. This is a not so subtle hint, so to just bribe us. So next up, and Freakling, you're up. What you've been up to lately, and generally how you've been and what you've been working on in the past. I think it was 1 month since we had the last cast, or about that.
Probably a month, yes. Well, what have I been up to? Mostly working on Inner Coven, of course, which is the map of mine, which is currently used in the ASL. And well, it was quite a bit of work to get that thing ready for the ASL because of all kinds of balance. Getting it updated. What?
What kind of balance issues? I'm actually curious. I'm not smart enough to figure those game issues out.
It's mostly an island map, and it turns out that at the current state, Terrans have a bit of a disadvantage, or at least have a disadvantage on the island maps that we have seen, like, for example, Sparker or now Inner Coven. So yeah, that's still not fully resolved, I think. And well, the last week before ASL, they were still pushing updates like on a daily basis to try and figure something out, which at the current state means the map has changed quite a bit. So yeah, basically I'm trying to put it back together right now. Otherwise, I've been doing some work for some maps, which we will see at the upcoming Brood War Clan League. And yeah, that's it, basically, mostly. I mean, that's quite a lot, actually, because I've been working for like dozens of hours already again on Inner Coven, so yeah.
So
yeah.
you've had, I had saw that it went from like version 1 to version like 1.2, and there were so many updates. So even though the tournament is going on currently, you're still pushing updates. The map wasn't locked, even though it's only played in first rounds.
Right now, it is what it is. But if you look at it, you can probably see like they changed it from a map that was basically not technically purely island, but purely island playstyle with disruption webs everywhere that would stop units from attacking. And the current version has gone like halfway back to a ground map where you can push through the middle through some destructible buildings, right?
Yeah.
So, but what all they did was basically, apart from some other small changes, is to like superimpose that on the structure of the old map. So now there's all this terrain in place, which was meant to like basically to work, to closely interact with those disruption webs, and not with what it's now with the where the middle is basically become a destruction map. So what I'm now doing is change the middle back again to change the middle so it better suits this kind of map. And additionally, I am trying to add some things like drop cliffs around the map that would further help Terran to get a little advantages in the early game on that map, because I think they still need it. And yeah, I'm not sure if ASL would then use it. Probably not before the round of 24 anyway, because well, it doesn't really make sense to change the map during the first round, and that wouldn't be fair to the players actually, because like one half of the players would play on one version of the map and the other on another with a different balance. So that I wouldn't advise that. So, oh, but yeah, of course, I'm still working on that because I think it's still not nearly the best version of itself that it could be. So, yeah, there's still a lot of work to do there.
When I was watching the ASL games, some of the map features I think really stand out as being obvious and what they're for. But I was curious what the 3 waypoint beacon things in the center.
That's just decoration. That's just for looking cool.
Okay.
It's not
All right.
really
I was
meaning
thinking,
anything.
do they serve? It's one of those things you're looking at the game and you're like, what is that for?
Well,
Is it a
actually,
decoration or is it a
original.
feature?
Have you seen the very original version of the map? Like,
I'm not sure.
let
Remember,
me let
there's
me
so
look.
many.
One moment, if I can find it.
Yeah, we can post the link later. I'm curious how many
I'll
hours.
post it.
Yeah.
Here it is in the screen chat. I hope. Wait, there.
Oh yeah,
So,
let me
if you look
fix
at
that.
that one, I'd advise you can just click in the picture and it will give you a big picture, right? What you have there is you
please,
have 3 beacons in the center, which actually have player colors on them. So that was meant to be scouting aid, basically. Because on an island map that has more than 2 spawns, it can be hard to find your opponent's base and then find out what build aura they are doing. And so that becomes a bit of luck, basically. And you can basically lose because you're blind to what your opponent is doing, right? So this was is one of the concepts I came up for island maps to basically make them a bit easier on players and to generally help Zerg, of course, because you can overlords are the first air scout you can get of any race, right? So yeah, but on this map, because it's actually not a real island map that you can scout by ground, it was deemed unnecessary, so I dropped that. But then I got those beacons back in a different form, just as decoration, because I just liked it, how it looked, basically. That's it.
So just to clarify, so it's possible to make beacons that show the direction of the opponent, like in the map center,
Yes.
that would like light up, and so you would know which direction to scout. That's what you're
That's
saying?
exactly it. Yes, I just posted another link to another map of mine. which
Sorry,
has
your
more.
Twitch is a little bit borked. Just please post the links here in the Discord channel too, and I will make sure that on Twitch they appear.
This is a map called Flight Path for quite obvious reasons, I guess. This is actually not the very newest version, but you can see the lines of beacons towards the center, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
it's
that's
much
so
more
cool.
much more useful here because it's actually a true island map, of course. And what you can do now is to scout the center, and then you know which direction to go to find your opponent, right? With an overlord, for example, or with a flying barracks or flying eBay or something like that as Terran.
And
or
you
with the
don't.
first shuttle as Protoss.
And
Right,
it works
they-
out of
these
the
were
box.
What do you mean out of the box?
I mean, you don't need to use map settings or anything. This is an actual feature of a
No,
map.
this actually works in melee mode, but with a few caveats, of course. The major caveat is that you can't place units or unit sprites belonging to a player, right? You can only place them for the neutral player, for player 12, right? For the light bluish player it was in the at least in the original
Does that mean no critters?
StarCraft. No, critters are normally placed for. Okay, let's go through it systematically, right? There are players 1 to 8, which are the normal players. And in a melee map, all you can place for the normal players are the starting locations. And then the game will replace those with a resource depot and workers and an overlord in case of a Zerg at game start, right? And it's all. And then there's the neutral player, player 12, which is the player which all the resources, for example, have to belong to. These are player 12. And critters are also player 12, or the neutral player in a melee map. You have to place them as player 12. And resources and critters are actually the only units you can place as units on a map, and they will appear in game. Because, well, that's what it was intended to, original by Blizzard, right? Resources you need on a map, and critters are just like these neutral units that crawl around and give some flavor or annoy you or whatever. And that's all you needed for melee mode. That what more was never intended. But of course, it turned out that there's a bit of a workaround in that you can place basically any unit as a unit sprite, which is original something that comes from installation tile set. Have you ever played any of the installation levels of StarCraft? Then you know there are these doors everywhere, and there's little turrets that come out of the ground and shoot you and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, these are what is called a dudit in the editor, of course. So they are basically terrain, but they have a sprite on them, and the sprite in that case is also a unit, or is converted to a unit by the game to make it that work.
I remember playing the Terran campaign and getting disappointed that I couldn't build those floor turrets when I first played StarCraft.
And but you can place. You can't only place those as unit sprites, but you can place any unit as a unit sprite basically with SCM draft, which is a nice little glitch or workaround that, well, of course, was discovered at some point when map editors became powerful enough to support it. And of course, that has been used in many forms, like neutral buildings to block some passages or something. That's pretty much a normal feature on maps right now. So, yeah. But again, you have to place those as neutral players, or again, they won't show up on the melee map in melee play mode. So what can you do? You can place neutral beacons, for example, and then place a player-colored beacon on top, or you can just use the player-colored beacon without the unit sprite at all if you want, if you don't want it to be clickable like a real beacon. If you place the beacons in the player colors, so the player color beacons as a pure sprite. Pure sprites can have any player color, can belong to any player, and will still show up in melee mode. So that's how it is done. By either just using the pure sprite or stacking the pure sprite on top of the unit sprite.
Sounds fascinating. It's like such a hack, right? Or I don't know, such a roundabout way of going
to time, basically to get sometimes to get things to work properly at all with StarCraft, and sometimes to come up with new things, right? To like this scouting help for island maps, or like something else, like for example something that's only become I think by now it's really become popular and mainstream. If you have resources on top of the resource depot or on top of the starting location.
Yeah, like fastest map ever. Or
where you have them right on the bottom and you have stacked them. Now, I mean, if they are north, not to the left or to the right or to the bottom, right, but to the top of it. But workers normally spawn at the bottom, right?
Mm-hmm.
For example, if you have a starting look, or if you have a main base at the top of the map, like for example on Aztec, you have this top base, right? Do you need a link, or do you know how the map looks like?
I think we need a link. But if we do not, the audience certainly does.
Okay, I'll post a link so we all know which map we are talking about. So this is Aztec, which is one, or has been for a long time, one of the more standard and most used, most favorite 3-player maps around. And as you can see, there's one starting location and one main base, which is right on top of the. It's against the top side of the map, not in the corner or to the left or right.
Mm-hmm.
So but as you can see, the minerals here are still to the left of the starting location, right? And the gas, of course, is on top because it has to be on top or to the left to mine properly, which is something we discussed last time in some detail.
Right.
So, but the important thing here, which I'm talking about, is that the minerals are to the left. Why are they to the left? Because if you think about it, or if you actually play the map, you realize that this is quite a bit of a problem because, of course, the minerals here are much more exposed to, any kind of harassment, basically. It could be just mutalisks flying in, or it could be a Terran dropping some vultures, or a Protoss dropping a Reaver, whatever. It's basically more vulnerable to all these kinds of harassment. So ideally, what you would want to do is place the minerals against the edge, so like on the other spots too, and then the gas to the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you can do that on top.
Why isn't this done here? Any ideas?
I'm not sure. All I know is, as Terran, you really don't want to spawn in the top because you'll just get murdered by mutas. I'm not sure. Why could?
It's a very simple reason. Your workers, your initial workers particularly, spawn on the bottom of the resource depot, of the command center or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to split them to the minerals, they have to go all around the command or the resource depot until they are there, which is quite inefficient, both in hard economic numbers, of course, because they arrive late, but it's also very awkward to micro and stuff like that, and therefore that would be also a disadvantage. And yeah, so what do? Classically, you would then do this kind of bad compromise where you would just have an exposed mineral line, or another example would be
So could this
For
be
example-
compensated for? So like on this
Yeah, that's
example
what
we're
I'm-
looking at on Aztec, you have 5 mineral patches that are the forward closest ones for like the top location.
yeah,
But could you,
that's
if
what
you spawned it against the edge?
I'm getting at step by step.
Ah,
So now I posted the link to Outsider, another
Okay.
very, very well-known 3-player map, of course, where you can see, okay, now here there's a bit of a different compromise, which is that the minerals curve around basically for the top and bottom bases. This is fine, I guess, but if you look at the top base, okay, they curve around. This means you can split a bit better, a bit. It's not optimal still because the mineral patches are still quite far away from where your workers spawn, and you can't really split to the 3 closest and fastest patches either. So I wouldn't say this is anywhere close to optimal, but well, it's another compromise you could go for classically. So what do we do nowadays? Looking for the last link.
Okay.
Which is, of course, the currently most played 3-player map, which is Sylphid.
Oh yeah, I like this map actually.
Or Sylphid, it's called by now, which is actually the correct form, I think. So, well, I'm not sure, is this even the right one? Wait a second.
It's Neo-Sylphid. Yeah, there was
the right one, but you can't really see what's going on there, so not at the picture at least. But that's not much
There
of
were
a problem
some
because alternatively I could just send you one of my maps to show it. This is, wait a second. This is Quintessence, which is a map of mine which is currently played in the BSL.
Yeah, I just wanted to say BSL.
What we do with it nowadays. As you can see, there are some critters around that top location, right? And well, they are hallucinated and they partly overlap with the starting locations, and that pushes the workers on top, and that, well,
Wow.
That's how you then get workers spawning on top of the starting location, and that fixes the issue, and you can do mineral lines against the top edge and have no problems. Yeah.
And they don't disappear, or how?
Well, the critters.
Yep.
If a player starts at that location, they are, because they overlap with the building space of the starting location, they will be removed by the engine right at game start, so they won't interfere in any way, right? And because they are hallucinated, even if a player doesn't spawn there, they will just appear into thin air after, what is it, 2.5 minutes or something like that, right?
Yeah, after the hallucination.
So usually you won't scout them or anything. They are just poof and begun.
Sweet, that makes the start locations even more balanced.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Um,
did you came up
this
with
is
this idea?
just an example for the kind of like workarounds you have to come up with often to improve things or make things work or
Unbelievable.
come up with new things, as I said.
Yeah, I wanted to ask how much work was Inner Coven so far, and how does it relate to the average amount of hours you've spent on the map?
Oh, Inner Coven is a special case in many regards, of course. First of all, those disruption maps. Like it's a really hard thing to work with, even to place them correctly, right? Because
Yeah.
SCM Draft, at least currently, can only display collision boxes for units right now, for actual units. And of course, you need the collision box to see how big or what space the web actually takes, because that determines, for one, how you can place it, because you can only place it on completely walkable ground, and then which area it affects it, because units actually have to overlap with it for it to work. So for it to block the unit's attack. And then the next thing, of course, is for it to really work, and that some strange things occur because, well, disruption webs on maps is not really a new thing. Of course, it has been around forever, basically. And one of the usual problems which occurred in maps which used it was that you usually, unless very careful, you would have some weird spots where something, particularly a zergling, of course, because zerglings are very small, could just hide in behind the web and attack something that would be under the web, and you couldn't attack the zergling with melee units or something like that. So basically what I had to do was I wanted to avoid any little, even very small spots, and any spots of 2x2 mini tiles is enough for a zergling to fit in, right? So I had to completely manually edit every tile around those webs to only allow spots smaller than that. So no zergling could, or any other unit, but of course zergling is the smallest, so zergling is what you have to look out for here, could step outside the webs and then be able to attack. So that was a lot of work, and of course it's an unusual type of terrain work, so I had to figure out how to best go about it first, and so on. There's lots of other weird exotic terrain I use on the map, and it was a completely new concept, and then I had to update it multiple times for ASL, for all the different stages, from the map competition to the testing to then the actual tournament, of course. And well, I guess I've probably worked for it for way over 100 hours by now.
Oh, wow.
But that's I wouldn't say that's usual, but I would say 50 hours for a map to really get it fleshed out is not unusual. So
what was the process like getting feedback as you went through these different stages with the map? Like, what kind of feedback did you get that caused you to do certain things?
well, I mean, the first line of feedback, of course, is posting it on BWEM and see what other map makers think about it. And well, okay, that the
And do you have a dedicated?
most of that map thread is actually a bit of a running gag of making posts mine by different people and what. Yeah. But then, what was the next step of feedback? There was then the ASL had this map competition, and the judges, basically ASL staff members, I guess, gave some opinions about the maps, and well, but that was more like, okay, we like the idea, and that was mostly it. Except for, well, they also pointed out that they really thought that those beacons in the middle wouldn't be needed on this map because you could scout by ground very easily with actually a pretty short distance between the bases. So that was the first thing. I removed those beacons, and well, then there was this play testing where Korean professional players played a couple of team melee games on it, and there I got some feedback from the players. But well, it's pretty interesting, of course. Like Terran players basically say it, well, this is mostly okay, and I think we have many options here, something like that, which of course was probably not that accurate, because now that the map has been played a bit more on ladder, or not on ladder, but in
So you
by
do have a
streamers and in spawn games and on the ASL, it seems like it's still, and despite some more last minute changes, not very Terran favored. While other things were pointed out, like the natural bases, or the neutral bases between the mains should be closer to the mains, so they could be easier defended. So what I did was, the original map had, of course, only 6 bases on the outer ring, and then 6 island bases closer to the middle. And so those were now the map has more, what is it, 9 bases on the outer ring, which are of course closer together now, and only 3 island bases in the middle. And a middle base in the very center was added because players thought that should be used more, because the middle basically wasn't very important on that map, right? So yeah, those changes. Those were based on player feedback, and well, yeah, like right now, the best feedback, of course, I have is looking at the statistics, watching some games on stream or in the ASL, KCM matches, stuff like that, and well, seeing what's it up, and it seems like it's a very nice Protoss versus Zerg map, of course, which is great, because well, there's classically Protoss was just imbalanced on island maps, and Zerg really struggled. Then that's actually a huge improvement, and now we only have the problem of balancing Terran, basically, which again is not that much of a problem, because there have always been very Terran favorite island maps around, like for example, what's it called, Hall of Valhalla, or do you need links, or I sent you map links, or so we know what we are talking about, or
yeah. Not the latest. You mentioned something called Valhalla. Is that right?
Hall of Valhalla, yes, it's
I think we haven't got that link. Okay, now we do.
there it is. I had to look at it. Now I have to find it.
No. Okay, in the meantime, I just let me fill the silence a bit. So yeah, I wanted to ask that if you have a dedicated team of players that can help you out, but if those players are actually Korean professional players, that's I think that's just the best thing you can have.
That's now, because it's an ASL map, of course. It's normally not easy to, well, the easiest way to get some serious playtesting done on a map is to get the map into some tournament, into some league, and then look how it turns out, right? because players are usually not willing to really hardcore play a map if it's not played in some tournament which they are participating in or something like that, or if it's on ladder.
Yeah, there's no incentive
Because, well,
otherwise.
players
If it's
also
not-
have limited time, I guess, and there's always quite a few maps around, so
Your time
if
is
there's no
limited.
incentive to play a map, maybe players will play a map once for fun or something like that, but of course the one for fun game won't really give you much of an idea, neither the player nor the map maker, what it will actually play like usually, because well, typical feedback you'll get after one game is often, or after having players just have a look at the map, is often, look at this spot, tanks will be imba there, something like that. And then you fix some things, and then it turns out the map is actually pretty hard on Terran, and that was probably not the most urgent issue, but so yeah, that's
Okay.
what I can say about that.
Let me bring up a point that a little bit. You said you watched the statistics and played it. Now that is something we can absolutely provide to you as a bot community. Granted, that is a little bit.
But you
Yes.
probably have a hard time getting games played on something like Undercover as well, I guess, because
We
most
can
bots
try.
probably not handle it, right?
I wanted to bring up that topic because we talked about this, and I'm not sure how bots would handle that map. To be honest, I think some bots could, some bots can, but many bots use the same terrain analyzing libraries. So it's mostly a question of if those libraries can handle it properly, and by handling it. It's not a matter of it's not like a bot will break. I mean that can happen, but it's usually just a bot will start doing not so optimal or downright stupid moves because it didn't evaluate the terrain properly. But you brought up this point before the stream. So what is how would you ask about this, or how can we help you figure this stuff out?
But how you could help me figuring out stuff?
Yeah.
Like testing maps.
Yes.
I don't know. I'm not quite sure that having bot games played on maps would be so helpful, because I'm not sure that bot balance would necessarily be a good representation of player balance, right? So
They
That's
are
fair.
somewhat different, yes. Just a comment about the previous question about bots in specific maps. Generally, if a map doesn't have walkable distance between two locations, it can generally only be run in specialized tournaments, because the majority of bots don't support, scouting over minerals or other specialized controls. So in AIST, I've had Third World and Sparkle as maps, but those are for a sort of specialist, more high-end bot style tournament. And really, the bots will be developed on those, but they only play a limited number of games, more like a human style ladder during the tournament itself. So with AIST, I'm a little more open to more creative or interesting maps. But most of the traditional ladders really can't support it because they do games in such volume, and so many of the bots supporting odd features would lead to 60-minute games on timeout and slow the ladder play speed for the bots that couldn't leave their base, and result in a lot of ties. So it ends up being wasted computational time.
Also, a point we brought up last time that like mineral mining rate and those hard to measure things we can absolutely support you with. I remember you asking about about stuff like that. Did you get any kind of cooperation so far? I would like to help you on that, but I personally don't have any time for that.
All right, sorry for the interruption. I'm back.
No problem. Well, please continue.
Well, I think we are touching on a lot of topics right now, so let me just quickly finish my little bit about island maps and island balance. I posted another link to a map called Desert Fox, which is also, well, not technically an island map, but it plays like an island map. As another example, so this and Hall of Valhalla are I wanted to bring up to demonstrate how an island map can actually be very good for Terran. And what you will notice if you look at either of these is probably that there are lots of spots where tanks can just attack expansions, right? Where they can just tank mineral lines and obliterate an opponent's economy. And of course, the other thing they have in common is that they have a pretty open connected middle where tank Goliath armies can move very freely. So that's two things, like good spots for tanks or tank drops, and a more interconnected middle where ground armies can fare a bit better, even though it's an island map, which would help Terran a lot. So I guess that's what I'm looking at right now for further development of island maps, which I think have a lot of potential, but of course need a bit time still to really get the formula right, I guess. So that's what I wanted to say about that. Next thing you said, this the mineral mining. Well, as I already said, one thing I am planning is to write a mining tracker, basically a bot that only keeps accurate or only takes accurate data of mining rates and worker movement, basically. I'm not come very far with that so far, though, because I had so many maps to work on. So yeah, but I'm sure I will post you about that on the StarCraft AI Discord soon.
Some bots
absolutely.
have pretty accurate internal tools. If you collaborated with an author, you could just have them shut off everything except for mining and just use that aspect with it.
Okay. Well, what they probably don't have, what I would like to have, is that they output the data right into like some ideally something that like an Excel what's it called?
Spreadsheet,
right, into some kind of spreadsheet where you could easily work with it further, or Excel spreadsheet data of, like just how many frames a worker does what, basically tracking anything from location to what order it is on. So is it moving? Is it returning minerals? Is it mining? Is it just waiting, right? To like all the vector data, like location, speed, turning rates, acceleration.
Not really a technical challenge,
of course,
I think.
is I am. Hello? What?
Hey,
sorry?
I just said from a technical standpoint, it's not really a challenge. We can absolutely do it.
Yeah. And the other thing is the whole thing is graphical data. So basically that it would paint on the screen. I know that's probably not hard either, because I've seen bots putting all kinds of graphical output on the screen. So just track this vector data, like location and maybe some other things on the screen to really show you the mining path, for example, right?
Yeah, Dan's offering in the chat.
And then output that in a graphic file or something like that as a screenshot.
Yeah, Give Dan or Purple Wave a call, a message after this. He's offering some help. So
Yeah, these are not really high tech things you're asking,
No, I
and
mean,
we would be happy to help.
the bot would really only be used as an output tool, right? I mean, it wouldn't even have to do any input. The only input that it could reasonably do is like the bot could probably do pixel perfect placement of workers to allow you to systematically test different initial mining positions and how from there it would mine. Because what really interests you as a map maker or as a player and as a map maker making maps for actual human players is of course what automatic mining paths workers would take, and not what a highly optimized bot with continuous orders of any kind could achieve, right? But just
Yeah, absolutely.
your normal mining would give you.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is the way. Basically, that's one of the simplest things you can do to just order a worker to harvest through with a bot, and that worker will use the built-in algorithm. So, yeah,
or just
absolutely not
the
a problem.
worker or the bot just realizes if you as a player control the or which any worker you have selected, basically that it starts tracking that one. Something like that, at least for a start.
I think Dan or some of the other bot authors, they could do all of that in a couple hours. It's not a big deal.
I'm sure.
I just had a sort of a side question that's related to this. We were talking about beacons earlier. In the campaign missions, it's possible to have beacons that teleport units from one location to another. Is that possible to do within the context of a melee map, or is that restricted?
No, because
to
that's triggered behavior. It's just a trigger if you on top of the beacon there's a location, and on top of the target. Well, if you look closely at those campaign missions, it won't even teleport your units to the other beacon, because that would then immediately activate the teleport back trigger, but it will teleport them to another location near the beacon, right? And then it's just if player X brings any unit or any man at this beacon location, then move this unit to the other location. Very simple thing. And play a teleport sound on top of that, right? Which is part of the standard sounds of StarCraft. So that's a triggered behavior, and therefore you cannot use something like that in melee maps.
That's unfortunate. I was just hoping that there would be a way to just have a portal between like two island bases or something.
that would probably make for a fun kind of map, although also a very very confusing map probably if you overdo it at least. But no, you can't actually do that. Not in a proper melee map.
I would love to create a bot like this on stream, but at this point I don't dare promising anything, because
you mean a mining tracker? Or
yeah. It's a reasonable amount of work, I think, and it would be real fun. And if we could make a tool that you and or any map maker can use, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even that the bot. I guess publishing the bot wouldn't be the problem either. But basically, in the end, what I hope to achieve is, well, okay, you can use the bot, but you could also just. I just want to have the tables basically of mining data, which then would help you to just look at the numbers and then design your mineral lines from that, for example. So you could have
what if it would be just a website where you upload your map and there is an automated testing pipeline and you get your data back? Would that be awesome?
It could, of course, be also like a next step, but then again,
you probably want more low level. You want to be able to see it live and inspect and all that. So.
Why though? Why though? I
See
think
it live, but you can of course go and I just put some mineral line in and then let the bot check whether that's balanced or not for all races and all locations and stuff like that. And if it isn't, then maybe you try something else, and then it's just trial and error. But you could also go ahead and just have tables of numbers and look at them, and then basically find from that the most ideal constellations that you can just use.
I mean,
you know that, right?
if we made, well, TSCMO made an in-browser replay viewer, then I see no reason why this thing couldn't be viewed in browser.
Yeah, okay, but let's talk about that then in detail another time.
Yeah, I'm just
Because,
wishful thinking here.
Yes, but that's all theory by now, and yeah, maybe we can someday have something like that, and that would be great. But I'd just be happy to have some minimal functionality right now and to just get raw data. That's what I am most interested in, of course, as a map maker, because well, all these fancy other things are cool, but basically one of the really last things that I think really lack for designing maps is really have reliable raw data on absolutely exact rates of mining under certain controlled conditions, because of course it's a complicated topic. If you have some very weird constellation of for example, pathfinding regions around your minerals and your resource depot, then all your data goes out the window because workers will take some very weird, inefficient paths and will be very slow, therefore, and that's something you want to avoid anyway. But if you have very simple layouts of pathfinding regions, like in the easiest case or simplest case, if all the resources and the resource depot are in the same pathfinding region, then that should give you some reliable data. And of course, you could then see, okay, if the workers have to cross between different pathfinding regions under certain conditions, has that actually any effect on the mining rate, for example, which isn't so clear from just observing in game. Just because the worker looks fine and normal doesn't mean they don't lose a frame here or there, right? So that would be another thing to look at then.
You're talking about frame briefly there, but does the I'm not so familiar if the map size or amount of features impacts the game frame rate or function
Not
in a
the frame
significant
rate.
way.
The frame rate is of course fixed unless your computer is well way underpowered or you're running whatever else on it and it can't take up with the game. But no, that's not the problem. I don't know what do you really want to know? What's your question
I was
all
just
about?
curious if the map size or number of features or doodads or critters or stuff has any impact on um, uh, like the performance aspects of play on a map.
The of course StarCraft runs on a well, as far as inputs and but you know all that, right? As bot developers, you have a fixed frame rate. Every I think on fastest it's like how many milliseconds it runs a full cycle of running all the orders and stuff like that, right? That's the logical frame rate that it runs on. That's fixed. And a map shouldn't really impact this. And it's a game from like 20 years ago, right? So if it could, it shouldn't really in any way really tax any current machines. So that shouldn't be a problem, no. And
Okay.
even then,
I was just curious.
you're experience some lag basically, or yeah, right. The frames will take longer to execute. The game will stutter, but I don't think that shouldn't really influence the actual gameplay beyond the point of like player annoyance.
One thing we run into on the bot dev side is that larger, more complex maps take more time to analyze at game start.
Yes.
So it's not unusual for bots to, whereas a human would start and play the game immediately. With a lot of bots, when you start the match, a bot might take a 10-second pause, right? Where it looks like they're timing out, but they're not really timing out. What they're doing is they're calculating
That's
pathing
just
and map features.
the bot part of the map analyzing, or
Right. It's only the
I
bot
mean,
half
I
that
think
scales
that's
with complexity.
I mean, even from the StarCraft engine part, I guess a more complex map could take longer to load for a few milliseconds or whatever, because of course the game does various steps of pre-analysis, like determining pathfinding regions, stuff like that, various analysis on terrain, like terrain levels and where stuff is walkable, and determining which it's mostly to determine pathfinding and to find bases for the AI, stuff like that. That's all thing that's done at game start, like replacing unit sprites with proper units, setting up the starting locations with all the required units in a melee match. That's all things, of course, the game has to do on the fly at game start, because they are not part of the actual map file, but beyond that, I don't. That's that, and yeah. Of course, the bots have to analyze a map too. That was one of my questions that I had on my notices here. What does a bot actually do? Of course, for players, when they first play a new map, they're probably very, very lost. Many haven't even looked at the map picture or something like that. They don't even know where their opponent spawns. First player games on maps can be very funny to watch. Bots probably have at least get full information of all the terrain and resources and stuff like that.
That's correct.
Start, right? And
yes.
is there any learning curve as far as specific maps are concerned for bots? Are there bots that, for example, learn things or test out and learn or improve on specific tactics or strategies or things like wall-ins or whatever on a specific map? Or
Yeah, they use their map analysis tools to help them generate wall-ins. There's actually libraries for Terran, Zerg, and Protoss libraries, all three. Along with there's something called map caching. So some bots generate their map analysis live at game start, and other authors prefer to do their map analysis offline and pre-generate a map cache file that then they load with their bot, and their bot asks that at game start. And those cache files are pretty interesting. They're generated by most bots use a program called BWEM, or BWM-community is really commonly used, and it actually shows a fairly pretty overlay of the map. It's like a layer of abstraction of the map in a lot of cases. It shows where the mining points are, the minerals, the bases, the different zones. A lot of bots treat like the main and the naturals different parts in ramps, so they know where to defend and attack and divide the map up into different pieces between them and their opponent. I think you might find the BWEM map analysis cache files fairly interesting if you were to get into those. That's something we could show you how to play with offline after this.
Yeah, okay. That's certainly something that sounds very interesting to look at, yes. Okay,
Next topic.
so what does a bot,
Or
if a bot opens a map, what does it actually see then?
Here, I'll show you. Let me show you what this looks like.
Okay, is this just some raw data that BW API gives you, or is it just already what a specific bot does?
This is BWEM, which is a map analysis tool. And this is what it looks like visually when it does analysis. So if you load that bwem.sourceforge.net, can you post these links, Sanko? Over
yeah, I already did.
The Twitch. Yep. And so you can see what these look like visually. If you go to that bwem.sourceforge.net and you just kind of scroll down and look at these visualizations, do you get an idea of what they're doing here?
Okay. Okay. So for example, okay, let's go then through some map specific stuff here. So it is, for example, able to realize that there are buildings blocking off a certain part of the main on Andromeda, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So from there, it would do what, or that is that in how far do bots react to something like that?
It just
They
provides.
can be.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
The map analysis tool just provides data that the bot can then use, and different authors use that data differently, right? So they may make a whole wide variety of decisions from this, or they may only use a small portion of it. Some bots might not even realize that there are ramps. They might not understand what they are or how they operate. Some bots might only recognize like my main and natural bases that they get and use that from the BWEM. BWEM actually stands for Boudoir Easy Map. What's the name again?
How does a bot, for example, decide which expansions to take, when, it in what order?
That's all internal decision making and is completely separate from the map analysis. It's better to think of bots rather than as like all one thing, as separate subsystems. So most bots, they have sort of it's like an overarching program, but they'll have like a map analysis program, a mining program, a building program, a fighting program, and so they're different. And in some bots, those systems don't even talk to each other almost, except very rarely. Some bots are more cohesive than others, but a lot of them are sort of these independent entities that work together to play the game. And so, but really, it's up to the bot author to use as much as they would like.
Have to agree on how to distribute resources, at least, right?
Kind of.
Sometimes they fight about that internally. So if you imagine that I have a bot and that you have competing requests, right? The portion of the bot that wants resources to build more workers and the combat simulator would be requesting different things. And how do you decide what the priority is? Do I build workers or do I build combat units? Or do I build more tech and more buildings, right? I mean, those are higher level decision making within the bot, and some of the most difficult portions of a bot to write is deciding which item gets priority when you have competing priorities.
Yeah, that's of course also where players have to face their important decisions.
Yes.
And the answer for players, of course, would be, okay, scout what your opponent is doing and figure out where you can gauge an advantage, right? So what's a bot doing? Oh?
It depends.
We were thinking, I think. I'm not sure how to answer that. Okay, let's.
There's like 20 different answers to that question, so it's really hard.
Let's try to narrow down.
There's different theories of how bots should be designed and different ways that they operate, and there's not agreement on any of that, right? And so, one group thinks, combat simulator like purely does decisions. Some are more integrated in what the requests are for units and stuff like that. So it depends from bot to bot and system to system. It gets into like theory of AI and theory of development. They're not short answers.
Okay. So let's go back to some specific map-specific features, like Andromeda has those, and not only Andromeda, it's standard feature, right? Has those depleted mineral fields blocking the island expansions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's such a standard feature, I would guess that any halfway advanced bot would know how to deal with that. Do they?
There's only 2 or 3 bots that are capable of clearing minerals to take island expansions, and that's it of the whole list.
But many more bots do that accidentally because it's just the workers have this default command, mine the closest mineral, and when the main is depleted, that blocking mineral will be the closest one, and they mine it out, and hey, now we can take that expansion. So
but the process of actually picking up a worker, taking it to expansion and mining it, and not picking up a worker that already has mined something and is holding something in its mouth, that process, there's only a couple that can do it. And they're pretty limited.
Hard for a bot.
Do you think SCVs hold stuff in their mouth?
In their drill hands, whatever.
Magically levitated in front of them, I think.
Bot authors only really fix stuff that they're losing to, and so that's where the incentive lies. And so generally speaking,
so if only a third of the maps, take an island-based strategies.
Very few of those. Because only a third of the maps have islands of any kind in the general pool. If you develop a feature that uses an island, it's only used on a third of the maps. And so it's not a generalizable feature, right? It doesn't help the mainline bot development. It's sort of an extra add-on. And so unless there's a really strong incentive for it for a specific map or tournament, authors are generally on the sort of general improvement path rather than the specific map specific improvement path, just because it's more efficient for them long term in terms of time and development cost.
So why does Ride of Valkyries actually show you terrain levels and the others do not? Is that just some options you can click on and off, or?
I'm not sure, specifically in this example. I know that BWEM does show terrain levels, unwalkable terrain, where the mineral blocks are kind of border zones and regions between bases. And actually, that's one of the areas that bots struggle with the most, is not differentiating region between bases that have resources, but differentiating the open map regions on a map and dividing those into sort of virtual sections. And understanding those, because that can be very confusing for a bot. Because oftentimes bots are commanded to build buildings in a region. So if you look at these maps and say, oh, I want to order my bot to make a proxy, I might pick that it will go in like a central region towards my opponent. But on some of these maps, that area can be very large. So where those buildings actually end up can vary by a large degree game to game in some cases.
By the way,
how does a bot determine build placement actually? I mean, I watched your live coding session on Sonko's YouTube channel, And it seems like what does that use? Is that just the automatic building placement that the internal AI also uses, or
Not quite. It's what we call default is just an algorithm that starts in usually at your main nexus or command center or hatchery and goes around in a circle until it finds a suitable location. So
basically that's a default option that BW API has.
No, it's just a very simple thing to implement. So many authors just go. It's like a few lines of code, and there is a code example on the SSEIT page. It's not default, but it is a well known and very simple algorithm that anyone can do basically. And yeah,
some of them even do random.
Sorry.
Some of them even do random placement, like they just pick a radius and just keep trying places where the building will fit until it places.
Okay.
Some of the newer ones, yeah. But the more advanced ones are much more sophisticated. But yeah,
that's what I wanted to ask, right? You can do like all kind of random or like where it fits building placement, which will lead to very chaotic bases and not really use the building space efficiently and might even block your own units in and stuff like that. So most human players, of course, use very sophisticated and often map-specific building placements, right?
yeah.
And how far can bots do this at this point?
Quite far. So McRave wrote a piece of software. What's the abbreviation for it again, Sanko? It does building placement by blocks using pro building block recreation.
I think it's BWEB.
BWEB, yes, is the name of it. And basically, they look like Protoss building blocks. So it builds the gateways and specific structures to ease access coming out of them. It's also capable of calculating correct FFE wall-ins for Protoss that are really, really good on almost all maps. It continuously gets updated over time.
That's mostly based on what players are doing, or?
Yes, it was. I helped influence with McRave to basically use player-inspired placements as ideal ones, and basically it calculates
just for wall-ins or for everything.
Both wall-in. It does wall-ins for Terran. It does FFE. It does building placement blocks. It does several other things. It actually does Zerg-based wall-ins too, and placement for Sunkens also. So it's a pretty sophisticated piece of software.
But there's one thing that immediately comes to my mind there, which is one thing players, or at least Protoss and Terran players for the most part, want to do is, of course, they want to set up one dedicated macro area in their base, right? Which is basically just one ideally screen-sized piece of terrain where they can place like 12 or more, or if you do it right, you can easily fit like 12 or even up to 20 like gateways or factories in just one screen, right? Because that's important, because then you can just set one macro hotkey there and click through all the buildings and get a full round of building going. A bot, of course, would not have to do this and would probably be better off, like, for example, building all their production facilities against the edge of the map or something like that, with lots of moving space in between, where, for example, you could very easily move your units back in to defend against drops and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're correct. It's screen is not a thing for bots. They don't look at the screen, they access the units directly, therefore the macro looks a little bit different. And there are some bots have very advanced SimCities as well, but mostly they just place their production facilities in a big blob, and maybe they have a wall of independent of that. But for example, Ironbot and Hopen can wall off in a way that it uses liftable Terran buildings, so it's a gate. So it opens and closes the door, and the units move out. So bots can do that too.
I put a couple links in there for BWEB, which you can probably post over into the chat, Sanko, regarding how its operation and internal functions, as well as a post from Jay describing a little bit more about how it works and its function.
Yep, done.
One more question to the graphics. Why doesn't it recognize the ridges on Heartbreak Ridge?
Let me look. So this version of BWEM is actually the older build. It's a couple years behind. The version of BWM that we use now is called BWM-Community, and it has more features and more updated functionality. But that one doesn't have these nice visuals to go with it, at least not easily linkable. But I'm not sure if it tracks the ridges on the newer version. This older version, obviously, as you can see, yeah, it doesn't track the ridges on Heartbreak Ridge correctly, or the high ground.
It misses some of the most important strategic or
Yes. Mm-hmm.
unit movement specific features of the map. So yeah, okay.
And that's one of the things that's always going on, because map analysis features are kind of are sort of developed along in parallel with the bots. Most people don't write their own terrain analyzer because of the complexity of it. They normally use one of the pre-built ones and integrate features from that. And so that development sort of happens in parallel. And the development on the map analyzer happens in response to new map features or issues that come up as testing is happening for different tournaments. So someone will find a bug related to a specific map that's being used in the tournament, and then a couple people get together and they'll write an update for the map analyzer, and then everyone else will sort of inherit that update if they update to the newer version of that specific piece of software.
So like, for example, if now you would decide to play on Inner Coven, because like that's just got a ton of non-standard features on it. What would happen? What would the bots do, or what would the map do to the bots?
Well, I guess the first question is
into the map analyzers, of course.
Only one way to find out. that's my answer.
That's what I'm suggesting. Yes. You only use this map for a month and we'll see what happens. No, yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I mean, you load it and see, I mean, sometimes the map analyzer just completely crashes and blows up right at start, right? And so the first stage is to get past that, and then it's trying to make it accurate. No, that's part of it, right? The map analyzers have been updated to cope with things like Sparkle and Third World and other very complex maps over time. Inner Coven is kind of a lot though, right? And so unless there's a tournament that has it's the same problem that you were talking about with tournaments and ladders. Unless Inner Coven makes it into a bot tournament or ladder, the incentive to work on it is not super high, right? But it is still sort of an interesting project to keep the terrain analysis software and libraries updated for the new maps that come out and come through the system. So
I guess if this scene would be bigger, then you would get a competitive edge by writing your own Terran analyzer library. But like Antiga said, these libraries are providing you some set of data, and you can utilize that more efficiently than other bots. This Terran Analyzer library can help you to find choke points and design wall-ins, but it can also help you to improve your pathfinding and I guess find high ground spots and I can imagine a few other
Both of
things.
which are not that important on an island map, though. So
Yeah, just an example.
last time you asked me about what I think bots could exploit in maps, and now I would like to give that question back in slightly altered form. What do bots already exploit in maps, and what do you think players could actually learn from that?
I can comment a little bit about that. Bots have extremely precise base-to-base distance tracking, especially the higher level ones. And I think that um, maybe outside of the very top few of human players, there isn't enough tracking of base-to-base distances in relation to um, especially ling brushes going on in human world. We've discovered that, well, it shouldn't surprise too many people, but for instance, FFE cannon timing versus specific openings, even from different map positions, um, can be extremely abusable if you have the timing down to like under a second. The same thing goes with DT rushes or other things that are involve detection. Um, the difference in travel time for a DT based on where you build the gateway and when it'll arrive based on the average game time that people put down a turret. If you manage that very carefully and track it precisely, it can be very abusable. So those are things that come up immediately and are fairly obvious, I think, to most folks. Other items are how much high ground impacts fights. Um, I think humans tend to underestimate the value of it, and some bots take pretty um, aggressive advantage of those features, both in terms of their ground army placement, but also high ground abuse in terms of air units. Um, uh, there are some bots that use carriers very effectively in combination with high ground with restricted vision to great effect, for example. So those are some things that come to mind. What comes to mind to you, Sanko?
Actually, the only thing I want that immediately came to mind is visibility exploit, like you said with the carriers, visibility, high ground, and maybe picking your choke points a little bit better. Not in a walling of sense, but when doing an engagement, I see human players like rushing into the slaughter too many times. You shouldn't engage in bridges in certain situations. But yeah, other than that, basically what you said, I don't have much more to add.
There's also, just to put a little more information there on the link side, there's some positions on some maps where FFE versus 4-pool is, for instance, not possible. Just a heads up. And I don't know that many human players know that or are
I think
aware.
most human players would agree that 4-pool is pretty much a hard counter against FFE or any other greedy build. But yeah.
Yeah, well, it's understanding, do you need to go, because most humans do the cannon on 10. And there's some bots that are in some positions on certain maps where you're forced into doing a cut and doing the first cannon on 9 if you want to survive a 4-pull, for example.
Blind counter.
Yes, right. So there are some blind
Something
counter
that most
aspects
humans
there.
wouldn't even do. So
Yeah.
unless you kind of play the mind game and think your opponent will like 4 or 5 pull you this game, but
Right. And also understanding what maps like 9-pool, no gas, Lings versus Protoss with the specific timing, what exactly you can get away with in terms of building timing and placement as Protoss is pretty important. And I find that humans are not very precise about it, and that there's a fair number of situations where that can be exploited. Also, the canon add speed behind FFEs with most humans is not precise enough. I'm actually running a bot build order that was invented by the Cherry Pie team on Ladder to great success, exploiting humans' deficiencies in building placement and timing. Personally, so there's some of that going on. There's some lessons coming out of this world that I think human players are not really aware of, or aware of the ability to exploit them. Another example is that StarCraft was never really designed with the human ability to control a large amount of lings at the same time. It was never balanced around that. I always assumed that you could only attack with, a couple of dozen, and they'll kind of attack in a line and not be carefully organized.
Attack them, yes.
Right. And the power of lings in high volume is pretty exploitable. Their cost versus their combat performance, health, and damage output is outrageous. And I've been abusing that as well, playing on Ladder. I'm doing things like, 3 hatchery versus Terran, the 3rd hatchery is an expand, but going very quickly to hive and into very high ling counts to a degree that most humans don't use because they don't understand the math of how good lings are. Lings are actually better for cost versus archons, even when archons have upgraded.
I think lings,
yeah, it's crazy.
cracklings are better than anything.
There's
in pure damage output per investment. So
this is basically free anyway.
Yeah.
Humans know cracklings are good, but they probably have never seen the actual
but they can only
on paper.
Fast select them and send them on suicide
Right.
Indeed.
Yeah. There's limits, but as a human, what I can do is I can pre-stack up groups and attack in a coordinated fashion, almost like a bot, if I organize that carefully, in a way that I think humans are probably not using enough. So there's some lessons that have come out of that, I think, that are pretty interesting.
Okay, and as a closing thought, I'd like to add that I think this is a beginning of a brainstorming about human versus AI meta, which I'm really hoping to see as the Schnell project develops. And I have the Schnell project on my mind like pretty much 24/7. But
we need to give you access, Freakling, as a closed beta tester. Bring you into the fun.
Actually, yes. I wanted to talk to you about that.
If I actually had the time to play, but okay. Maybe.
Okay, guys. This has been awesome, as it was last time, but we have to cut it short this time. And Freakling, I would love to have you back. I hope we can arrange that. And let's end the stream. And thanks for everyone for listening, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on, and looking forward to the AIST tournament.
Yep. See you there. Bye.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting discussion. Bye.